Well, hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you today to today's session, Decolonizing Wealth, a fireside chat with Edgar Villanueva. Thank you very much for attending. My name is Jay Wiseman. I'm a member of the AiP National Board, and I chair the AiP Webinar Committee. I'm an independent philanthropic advisor and founder of the Legacy Philanthropy Group. Just some quick housekeeping. AiP participants can chat and ask questions at any time during the session by utilizing the live discussion box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. NACGP members, we invite you to participate as well. You can submit your questions to admin@advisorsinphilanthropy.org. I'll say that again, admin@advisorsinphilanthropy.org. And your answers will be provided to myself, Rick, and Edgar. If you have any technical issues, please email aipsupport@gtrnow.com. Following the session, you'll receive a survey with which you can apply for CE credits. We'd also love to hear your feedback on the session. So we are here today with two groups with closely related missions. We have financial planners of various types who center our work around wealth, helping clients accumulate, grow, diversify, protect, sustain that wealth, and then prepare that wealth for their heirs, and nonprofit gift planners who center our work around giving that wealth or some pieces of that wealth away, guiding our donors and connecting them with our missions. We've assembled today to share ideas about how we can all collaborate and enrich the work we do by including a conversation on values and vision, in essence, asking the question, why? If done well, we view our ultimate goal as financial advisors as helping our clients get the most joy from their wealth. And if done well, we view our ultimate goal as gift planners as helping our clients get the most joy from their giving. In the end, we all have the same high-level objectives: to make a positive impact on our clients and donors and the communities where we live and work, and on the businesses and organizations that we represent. In our role as advisors and planners, we're certainly in a position to guide our clients and donors, but a huge part of our opportunity lies in educating and inspiring those we serve. We can help those clients and donors be more thoughtful and intentional as they look to make an impact, taking a larger view of how their efforts to give back impact their communities, impact the organizations that they partner with, and also impact those that they choose to give with, perhaps their families, their faith-based communities, or perhaps even those that they work with day in and day out. That journey towards philanthropic acuity and inclusiveness can be exhilarating and at the same time daunting. It often presents opportunities for reflection and sometimes requires us to be open to what might be uncomfortable truths with respect to the journeys we've taken and the places we hold in our society. Sometimes when we set out to do good, we discover that in fact, we also need to be brave. In that spirit, I'd like to welcome you and invite you to enjoy today's conversation featuring Edgar Villanueva, an award-winning author and activist, Rick Peck, who leads the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation's Philanthropy and Donor Services team, will be guiding today's conversation. You can read all of our speakers' complete bios by viewing their profile in the Speakers tab on the conference platform. And without any further delay, I'll hand things over to Rick and Edgar.
Thank you very much, Jay. We appreciate that. So, Edgar, I just want to start by saying that I'm very excited and honored to be speaking with you today. My colleague told me about you a few years ago, so I feel like I'm meeting one of her heroes and now truly one of mine. Your book, Decolonizing Wealth, now in the second edition, is one of the most important books I have ever read. It balanced your incredible personal story and history with profound insights about the field of philanthropy. And you enlighten your audience to the whole concept of colonization, its destructive legacy, and the steps we need to make meaningful change. Additionally, with the transfer of wealth being at all-time highs, your words, I don't think, could be more timely. So thank you for all that you have done and continue to do. So I work for a community foundation, as Jay said, one of the largest in the country and one of about 800 in the US. Community foundations are a hub of philanthropy and are connecting intermediaries between those who give and those who are advising them on the local mission-driven organizations that provide the programs, expertise, and feet on the ground in our communities. So your message right now resonates very strongly with the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation where I work, because we're moving through a strategic planning process centering on equity of all types and listening to the people who are closest to the work and listening, as you say in your book, with humility. So I'll start with this comment and then a question. You've become a highly visible individual as a proponent and advocate of justice and equity, and you've helped provide a recipe for change for those who are willing to listen. For those who have not yet read your book, in a few words, if that is possible, because there's so much terrific content in that book, would you like to tell us a little bit about that journey and what has brought you here today?
Absolutely. Thank you, Rick, for those kind words, and thanks to everyone for being in community today. It's an honor to be with you for this conversation. So Decolonizing Wealth, the first edition, which came out in 2018, second edition last month, has been described, I would say, by some as a provocative analysis of the dysfunctional colonial dynamics at play in philanthropy and finance. And I'll just break that down a little bit more. I'm a Native American person that has worked in this industry for 2 decades now. And part of the book is me sharing my story of coming from, an indigenous community, a community with low wealth, kind of all of a sudden being in these organizations, these institutions with lots of wealth and privilege, and what that felt like and what my experience was navigating not only the internal dynamics of working inside philanthropy, but trying to be a part of a movement of people to push for change and to see equity as we're talking about it now. So comfortably, back then it was sort of a new idea, but kind of advocating for more support and funding to communities of color, and sort of what I experienced in that journey. And not just me, I pull in lots of stories from folks who had similar experiences, whether they be women or other people of color. And I ultimately kind of just summarized the book in my words as a love letter, a loving critique to an industry that I deeply love and care for, because our role is just so important in society, and I know that we can do better. And I wanted to get beyond sort of the rhetoric of all the DEI conversations to really a deeper, more transformative analysis and conversation for what we can do as leaders in this field to actually achieve the equity and the diversity and inclusion that we talk about. So that's it in a nutshell. I try to bring in humor, love, laughter. Parts of it are probably heavy, but ultimately it's an invitation to everyone to come in and to participate in a healing journey.
Thank you. So could you talk a little bit about a topic you address in the book, money as medicine? Just talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So first, I'll start with medicine, because everybody knows about money in this space probably. But, in the indigenous worldview, my tradition, when we talk about medicine, anything can really be medicine that we see as a sacred thing, something that makes us feel whole, something that brings us balance or energy. It can be, for me, if I've had a really tough day, I have a couple of friends I might call and just chat with on the phone who are going to always make me laugh and kind of lighten my spirit. And so that conversation was a form of medicine. And in our culture, we believe that you don't choose the medicine chooses you. And in my work in philanthropy, at a certain point in time, I think I got a little disillusioned and just kind of wondered, like, wow, this is hard sometimes. And working around privilege, working around wealth, am I really kind of showing up and doing work that is where, in a space where I'm called to be? Or is there some other place? Because maybe money is like this yucky, sticky thing that is just like not where I need to be focused. And in that process, honestly, an elder said to me that money had chosen me, that the medicine that had chosen me was money. And I came to understand through that process that it's not about money. It's really about us as people and how we choose to use money and how we have used it in the past and how we can use it in a different way in the future. And so for my calling, my medicine, my contribution to making our communities whole is money. It is actually helping to move money into where the hurt is the worst. And we know that pain is the worst in communities of color.
Thank you. Excuse me. So could you dive a little bit into what really resonated with me was the idea you mentioned superficial change, and you're trying to avoid this superficial change. So what is keeping us from making real change? What are the stakes? Just can you talk a little bit about that?
You know, I think there's a lot of reasons that we are resistant to change. You know, I think philanthropy in many ways has been an industry that rewards the status quo, right? There's a game that is at play, right? That's a dance. It might be another way to think about it, between donor and recipient, right? Between funder and fundraiser. This whole fundraising cycle that we all know so well, and all the steps and the approach to get to that transaction of getting that gift made to the work. And so I think that, you know, this has been an industry in the past where if you sort of didn't follow that pattern, or you were someone who kind of spoke up, you know, kind of called attention to things, you were maybe seen as an outlier, and you weren't rewarded for sure. We have, you know, especially in the foundation world, kind of elevated and promoted folks who came in, kept their head down, didn't ask questions, just implemented what the board said. And sort of, you know, assimilated to a power structure that, you know, the family or the trustees at the top say what goes and you just kind of do it. You know, happy to see that that's changed and evolved quite a bit, and that more and more institutions are bringing in people with lived experience and expertise around issues to really begin to drive strategy, and to influence what how decisions are made about resources. But that's you know, I think when we get to the part about superficial, though, we are also living in a time where, you know, it's really easy to get on board and put out statements about things. Like, I can almost, anytime something happens in the community, I start this countdown. I'm like, from 10, I'm like, by the time I get to 0, there's going to be 101 statements that foundations put out into the world, right? And I think that it's gotten to a point where the statements feel quite superficial, and even the philanthropic newsletters are kind of stopped publishing them, or they lump them all on, like, you know, some link, because who's really reading all of those statements? What we really want to see is, like, where are you putting your money, and how are you actually shifting power and doing something that's radically different? And that's where, beyond sort of the performative work that we can do sometime to put out statements or say the right thing, or have, you know, photos of people of color on our website, are we really moving the money? Are we really diversifying? And we're seeing that we're not. We still have a major diversity crisis in this sector, and we still have a major underinvestment in communities of color. So the real change is what must happen to actually change those numbers for me.
Great, thank you. Could you talk also a little bit about two things? One of them is you mentioned at the end of the book, healing cannot occur unless everyone's part of the process. All related and all connected. And then tie that to what you talk about in the book around the 7 steps to healing. Just talk about maybe both of those topics.
Absolutely. So the first part of the book is really like, what's broken, where are we hurting, and how do we get here? So there's a lot about the history of wealth, the history of race in this country, and the intersections of the two, and really making the case that poverty is the product of public policy, very intentional public policy that has been put in place, that has created, accelerated, or accumulated, I should say, benefits for a certain group of people in this country, and accumulated disadvantages for others. And it's also, poverty is also the product of theft, where wealth has been taken from communities. And that's all been sort of undergirded or facilitated by white supremacy. And so when we think about healing, you know, which is sort of the latter part of the book, it's that the approach to healing is not blaming, it's not contributing to the conversation of us versus them, but it's all of us, like, understanding we're all here now, we're all relatives, and there is, you know, there's a history that we all have to take responsibility for, or ownership over. If we're going to get out of the mess that this country is in the US, if you're in this country, or maybe there's probably mess everywhere we're all living, to make change, we have to come together, and we have to take ownership of the history. And understand that a path to healing, and healing cannot be something that occurs in isolation. It takes all of us, in my case, a descendant of indigenous people, being at the table with the descendants of colonizers, perhaps, and understanding that the history that came before us has been painful. White supremacy harms all of us, including white people. And we have that thing in common, that we've all experienced trauma and pain, and there's an opportunity to come together for collective healing. So we have to do healing on our own, but there has to be a time and place where we come together for a collective healing process that can be rooted in ideas of restorative justice and truth and reconciliation.
Thank you. Could you address the idea of risk? What's the risk of not doing what you're talking about? So say philanthropy continues on the way it is. Many people would say, well, it's fine. We're still making a big difference in the world. There's so many different ways that we're helping, but you're pointing out something I think that's very important for people to focus on. So just, I sometimes look at what is the risk of not focusing on decolonizing?
I think for the industry at large, there is, we've always kind of been an industry that likes to autocorrect. We have our reports, our research, our conferences, and our best practices that we publish. And my fear is that we're not getting there fast enough. We know what the right things are to do in a lot of cases, but we're just not seeing it happen. I think the risk for us, depending on it could be a risk or opportunity, depending on how you look at it, is that sooner or later, the public is going to come for these resources, right? In the US, we're sitting on $1 trillion of philanthropic capital. And in times where we are seeing such a vast gap in the wealth gap, and especially by race, and there's an increasingly sort of resentment towards people with wealth in this country and institutions of wealth. If we don't do something to make the change, to demonstrate the public value of foundations of philanthropy by actually moving money to support communities versus hoarding it, I do think that there could be a potential movement for legislation, right, to hold institutions accountable. When budgets are strapped in governments, they start looking at philanthropy. What's going on with that money over there? And I was just sharing with some folks earlier that what used to be a very internal, insular conversation in philanthropy around things like the minimum payout rule or whatever is increasingly more like public knowledge. I've been on public radio talking to folks in the middle of the country and on local radio stations, and people are calling in and they are aware of some of these sort of benefits and privileges that foundations have held that feel a little bit unfair. So I think the risk is if we don't do the right thing, there will be a movement for forced accountability and potential legislation to force folks to do it. Now, that's not exciting, and that's what I'm hoping for. I hope the risk for me is if we don't do this, we're not going to be as effective. We're not going to see transformative change in communities. We are missing opportunity for true healing, and we're going to continue to sprinkle dollars on the symptoms of problems in our communities versus the major opportunity to invest real money and systemic change that could really uproot and get to the heart of inequality. We know from research that investing in advocacy, investing in the root causes of issues is a much larger return on the investment per dollar. And I think that's ultimately the risk that we're taking, is that we will continue to kind of talk among ourselves, fund ourselves, do some good work here and there, but there will be no real systemic change. And 100 years from now, we'll still be sprinkling dollars towards the same type of issues around poverty that we see now.
Thank you. So I'll just mention at this point, if anyone has any questions for Edgar, please post them to the chat and we will lift those questions and infuse them into the conversation as we go. So I'll just change gears a little bit. Your audience today is, many people are advisors. They're either contributing today because they're affiliated with the Advisors in Philanthropy Group or the National Association of Charitable Gift Planners. So where is the intersection between what you do and what you're talking about and the work that we do as advisors, philanthropic advisors, and charitable gift planners?
I think our work is completely aligned. I have been a grant maker in the past. We have a fund still in my organization, so I continue to do grant making, but the majority of my work is focused on sort of educating, engaging, influencing, shifting the hearts and minds of people and institutions with wealth in this country. So I think for many of us, we have the same kind of job, and which I think is such a critical job. And there's so much power and opportunity in the roles that we hold to really influence resources. We all know and sort of advising people with wealth that often they may be disconnected from what's happening on the ground in communities. They may be too busy to get involved, to do the hard work, the extra work that it takes to find new organizations outside of their network to fund, that might be organizations led by people of color. And they may really kind of rely on us sometimes to kind of hold them accountable. And that's a piece that I want to double click on for a second, because I think that the tide is really changing. For so long in our positions, we've kind of been more sort of pandering to people with wealth and really kind of carrying out their wishes. And I think there's an opportunity now for us to sort of influence and to actually have an agenda and not have what I call donor fragility, where we're afraid to kind of bring up issues of race and power, or have real conversations about what's happening and what the best use of resources could be. There's really something happening right now in those circles of wealth where people are attuned and listening and asking questions in a very different way about their wealth and how they can minimize harm, and reparations and redistribution of wealth. Conversations are happening in a way that I just never imagined. And so this is not the time for us to shy away and to see our roles simply as moving money to the favorite issue of the day for these folks, but actually maybe having an agenda and seeing ourselves as resource mobilizers to move money towards justice, to be sort of bold and influential in where we're directing resources. And this is not to take away the right to choose for people who have wealth. I support giving from a place from your own heart, right? And your own what really motivates you. But also if we can help folks understand that giving to the work of justice, giving to support sort of closing these major disparities and to support racial healing, it's not just about helping Black and Brown people over there, but it actually is a critical part of helping to liberate the donors themselves, because we are all in this thing called life together.
Excellent. Thank you. We have two questions. I'll start with one from Mary. In a prior session, one of the speakers offered ideas to start the conversation, but many don't know where or how to start, because to Jay's point earlier, it can be uncomfortable. So could you offer some thoughts on how to start dialogue with clients, with potential donors, with donors?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mary, for your question. I understand the challenge there. And my thoughts and just sort of recent experience are two things. One, we have to work on our own boldness, and sometimes it's sort of internalized ideas and thoughts that we hold about donors that prevent us from taking that step forward. I think, for me, I've assumed in the past, oh, they wouldn't be interested in this, or this is, and sometimes I've worked with very, very wealthy folks who have teams around them who are like, don't talk about this. Like, we got to be on eggshells. We don't want to, we treat these folks as almost like they're not human sometimes. And what I found in those situations, when I get actually with the donor one-on-one, they go immediately to the conversation about race. Like, what's happening with the movement for Black Lives? What is this thing happening over here? Help me understand what's happening and how I can help. And so the old way of these preconceived notions about wealthy folks, we have to kind of dispel that, because that's our baggage and work that we have to do. And then the other thing I just want to say there, My approach has really been about being vulnerable myself and using my own personal experience and storytelling as an opportunity to bring up a conversation, right? And so there's no curriculum, like here are the 5 things, right? But speak from your own experience, like, wow, do you see what's happening in the world? And like, how it's making you feel and what you're thinking about it, and use that to ask questions, right? So I deeply root my education in my personal storytelling. And to think about when you're sharing your story about your journey and what you're learning and experiencing, that's not a topic that's up for debate, right? Like, this is your story, this is your truth. No one's going to say, kind of push back on that, versus if you come in with data or from some research, maybe that could be debated. But we, at the end of the day, we change our minds, we shift our hearts based off of the power of storytelling. And so find your own story about equity, how you came to this work, how becoming a part of this change has influenced your own life and improved your life and brought you liberation. And that's a key part of how you begin a conversation and begin to, just like they taught us in the old way of fundraising, that, when you invite someone to give, you're inviting them to participate in something joyful. When you invite someone into a conversation about liberation, you are actually inviting them to be a part of liberation. You're extending a lifeline into their humanity, to be a little bit more free themselves. And so you don't want to deny anyone that wonderful opportunity.
Thank you. So I'm really hearing you say, have that conversation, don't make assumptions, go lean into the conversation. Sometimes expect that the person might be ahead of you and might be looking for that information in ways that weren't being presented to them before, and then to have your own stories and to tell some personal stories and some things that might be compelling to keep the conversation going.
Absolutely.
That's great. All right, another question from Jody. She asks, is there a platform you recommend where you direct advisors or philanthropists to learn about issues and how they can join or do participatory philanthropy?
Yeah, thank you, Jody, for your question. There's a lot of great things happening across the sector right now, kind of under the banner of democratizing philanthropy, participatory grant making. I would be remiss if I didn't share one that I have been a part of starting at Decolonizing Wealth Project. We have a community called Liberated Capital. It is sort of a giving circle model where anyone can join, and people give from $5 a month to $5,000 a month. And so it's a community that is redistributing wealth. We fund 100% Black and Indigenous led organizations. And for our community of donors, where we have about 350 donors now, we offer programming. We come together for all types of, right now, online events, hopefully in person in the future, for conversations. And sometimes it's conversations from community leaders who are coming in and talking about different issues. Sometimes it's donors and just other folks who have been on a journey to decolonize their thinking around this work. So that's absolutely one platform that I recommend folks check out. Of course, hopefully many of you have heard of, about the community-centric fundraising community launched by my friend Boulay. I think they're building a really amazing place for folks who work in the fundraising space to think about really shifting from a donor-centric model to a community-centric model of how we do our work. They have fantastic events and resources, and are building a community of support for folks in these types of roles as well. So those are 2 examples to kind of get you started.
That's great. All right, I have another question from Rebecca. It's a multi-part question. So
okay,
brace yourself. Here we go. In discourse about the racial inequity of our tax code, I never see any discussion of the charitable income tax deduction specifically, probably because it is less problematic than other aspects of the code. What are your thoughts about our responsibility in working with people with wealth around helping them avoid taxes through charitable donations? Although less problematic than other parts of the code, is it still part of the problem? Finally, do you feel the AiP Grassley King legislation is helpful to moving us forward or misses the mark?
Good questions, and I will say I'm not a tax expert, so I probably won't fully answer the question. But this is my insight into that question is that there are contradictions, lots of contradictions in this work, right? So my approach is sort of a both and approach to these types of challenges. Within the system as it is, what is the most good I can do, right? Like with folks are going to get a tax write-off. So where can I advise for that money to go? Will I advise it for it to go to a donor advised fund that will sit somewhere and maybe not ever see the light of day for public benefit? Or can I advise that donor to put that money with an organization that needs it and is going to be putting that money out in a community doing fantastic things with it, right? So there are a number of BIPOC-led intermediaries right now, a major strong ecosystem of folks that have trusted relationships and community who are able to move money to the ground really quickly across all types of issue areas. So Liberated Capital, one I just mentioned, for example, not only do we have the giving circle model, folks, write big checks and we redistribute that wealth, and they still get their tax write-off. So it's choosing. You all have the ability to put in front of donors a portfolio of organizations that are doing justice-centered work, who are led by people of color, who historically have been marginalized by this industry, right? So within the current system, you can direct folks to that type of giving versus sort of maybe a donor advised fund that is going to give the immediate tax write-off, but it's not going to potentially see public benefit right away. So that's one thing. And then I said, and at the same time, I think we all have to think about how can we advocate to change the system, right? Because, it is a system that is rigged in favor of people with wealth. And at the end of the day, I think wealthy people should pay taxes and pay more taxes. And it's quite unfair that they are not taxed at the same rates in the first place. Then they get to give and get even more of a tax break. So, you can question at some level if this whole philanthropy industry is about the preservation of wealth or helping to grow wealth, right? No one got rich, or no one, all the billionaires and millionaires who gave during COVID got even more wealthy during COVID, right? So those are the realities of an injustice that's at play as a byproduct of our economic system that we have to not be naive about, right? While we are trying to do the most good with the money we have access to or can influence now, also being a part of an advocacy, I think, at large to think about how do we get wealthy people and corporations to pay more taxes? How can we, think about, the increased regulations on foundations and on this industry that are going to push us to do more of the right thing? Now, I work in this industry, so it might be like weird that I want to be more regulated, right? But again, I don't think that we're going to do the right thing on our own unless there's some type of outside pressure that's going to make us do that. And so, we have foundations on the Hill Day where all of the funders go to DC and really advocate to keep things the same. And the reason they want to do that is it's because it's in our interest as institutions to maintain control of our wealth. We don't want to give more of it to the community, right? So those are like contradictions that we have to hold, because I know that those of us in this industry, our priority is we're here because we want to help community. We want to see these resources make improvements in our community. Yet we have a lot of structural things in this industry that can actually benefit wealthy folks while not benefiting the community. And those are the things we have to begin to kind of chip away or question so that ultimately resources are flowing to folks on the front lines of leading change in our communities.
Great, thank you. All right, I have another question. It's also pretty detailed. Here we go. From RJ. In the spirit of having difficult conversations, do you realize, Edgar, this is directed directly to you, do you realize, Edgar, that you are sending out very different messages? You state you want to see a, quote, coming together for collective and racial healing, end quote, while at the same time, you freely use phrases or words like white supremacy, theft, decolonizing, that more often can close off conversations before they could start. Is this wise? As an Indigenous member, I realized the taking away of land and cruel treatment toward various Indian nations make this very personal and painful. Where have you found the most helpful way to keep an open dialogue to bring positive outcomes? And if you were given the ability to have every wish come true from your perspective, what would that specific change look like?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I think that me putting sort of difficult issues on the table, or my putting difficult issues on the table around factual things that have happened in our country's history is contributing to a place of healing, because I do so in a way that is not pointing fingers or blaming white people, but it is an acknowledgement of what has happened in this country. And my approach to speaking truth about the history, again, is not to be anyone over the head, but it is to help folks understand that the history that has come before us is not serving any of us well, including white people. When I talk about white supremacy, I'm not talking about white people. Let me provide some clarity around that for folks. White people are people with light skin who are a cohort of folks who are white identifying either by choice or by our government, our community, or society that puts people in these categories, right? And so no one chose to be born into whatever family we're in. And so that's just the cohort that you're in. White supremacy is an ideology that was made up. It's a false doctrine. It is a lie, the greatest lie ever told, possibly, of a thing that's not true. Yet we have all kind of subscribed to that at some level, or been complicit in that. Our policies, many are shaped around this idea. Our systems have been shaped around this idea, our economic systems. And folks who are part of this cohort of white folks have benefited from that, right? And so it's not an attack on the people, it's an attack on a false ideology that is not serving any of us well. And whether we have benefited from it or whether we have not benefited from it. So calling out white supremacy is super important when we're talking about money, because ultimately it is an ideology that has so deeply influenced how wealth has been accumulated in this country. And so if we're talking about moving money or redistributing money or getting money to other people, we have to acknowledge that white supremacy has had a role in limiting that. When we look at philanthropy now, less than 10% of grants go to communities of color, explicitly to organizations led by people of color. And I think this is a byproduct or a result of white supremacy thinking and behaviors that have been baked into our way of being. When we hear white supremacy, I know that it's often we think about like the KKK or like January 6th and the people who were in the Capitol. It's not that. It's not just that. That is definitely white supremacy, but white supremacy is also just a way of being or a mindset that has permeated our whole society, that leads to things like having, better schools in white neighborhoods and schools are not as great in communities of color, right? It's structural in the way that we see it showing up. So my approach is to lovingly invite everyone into a conversation about like, hey, this is our history. This is my history. What are we going to do about it? It's up to us. And so it's really not creating division. It's actually bringing people together into a conversation that is quite different from most conversations that tend to happen about race. So that is the invite. I think it's all in the spirit of the delivery as well. And if you have a chance to read the book, you'll see that it is a very loving sharing of the truth. It is not blaming or pointing fingers, but it's like, hey, y'all, we're here. We're all related. It's the 21st century. We got to figure this thing out together. Can we take on the spirit of all my relations and see each other as relatives and figure this thing out together?
Thank you.
And that's the truth that I'm finding that donors want to hear. Not everyone is here for this party, right? We'll be honest about that. But most folks who are serious about their philanthropy and want to see real change want to talk about these issues, because race neutral grant making is not as impactful. You got to bring that intersectional analysis into problems. How do we get here and how do we get out of here? Race has had a role in it.
And with that, the focus on certain groups who are suffering and need a certain amount of focus, that can help other groups that might not necessarily be of that same group. For example, if someone's suffering from poverty or housing shortage or mental health, and we're focusing on a certain group, it's not a zero-sum game. It sounds like all boats can rise.
Absolutely. It is not a zero-sum game. And when we focus at the margins of our communities and those who have been harmed the most, it does, it impacts everyone and lifts all tides. If we don't put some focus there, then the default is we're going to continue to do what we've always done, and it's not working. We need to see change happen at a more rapid pace.
Great, thank you. I have another question from Laura. For those who read and enjoyed your book, do you have a recommendation for further reading or other resources to explore decolonizing wealth globally and beyond the US?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. When you were just now speaking, Rick, I thought of Heather McGee's new book, The Sum of Us, which really gets to that issue about, talking about race, talking about equity, and really understanding those issues through that it's not a zero-sum game, but this is really about all of us. So I invite everybody to read that book. Many of you may have read Winners Take All by Anand Giridharadas. This is a book that came out around the same time as my first book. And kind of, if you go to Amazon, they're kind of presented as a package deal. Anand kind of brings a critique to the sector from an outside point of view. My critique is more from an insider point of view. And so that's a little bit of a difference, but he brings some really valid points and is very kind of entertaining to listen to as well. So there is some really great thinking that's happening right now around really shifting things within our sector. And there's just also so many fantastic resources for deepening our analysis around issues of race, power, and money in this country that I would recommend, like Heather's book.
Excellent. And I just posted to the chat two things I was going to call attention to, and I'm just going to call attention to them now since we're talking about resources. But Edgar has a journal, and it can be found in a link. Hopefully, if you didn't get the link, I'll try to send it again, or we can send it afterwards. But if you use that discount code, you'll be having access to the journal. And then Edgar's book, if we have 10 or more people reach out to us after this session, we'll post how to do that later, but we can get a group discount on his book. And that was from his publisher, so it's excellent. So maybe we'll pivot just a little bit. One part of your book I found very fascinating was the privilege walk. And for those who haven't read the book, can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, you're referring to sort of an exercise that groups have participated in when you're around, and everyone kind of starts at the same place, and you ask a question, and if the answer is yes, you take a step forward. If the answer is no, you take a step back. And they're just questions that are kind of asking about different opportunities in life, essentially, like, did you do you have student loans maybe, or did you get to participate in X, Y, and Z as a child? And what happens a lot of times in these kind of exercises is you begin to see in a room that there, a lot of folks have benefited from privilege, and there are folks who are taking steps back and are all the way against the wall because of disadvantages. More times than not, the folks with the disadvantages are people of color, but we also know white people in this country. There are actually more poor white people than there are people of color, right? So again, a reason why it's really important to understand that race absolutely matters, but also we have an economic system that really is stacked against poor people in this country. And while so few people kind of get to keep taking steps forward and benefiting from that. So it's acknowledging that. It's not to instill guilt to the point, again, we can't help what families we were born into and as children what benefits we have, right? But can we get to a place to where we want those benefits for everyone, right? I am not anti-wealth. Decolonizing wealth does not mean, you know, that we all should take a vow of poverty. I want to build wealth in my own life. I just want everyone to have the same opportunity to do so. And there are structural things in place that have to change and new types of policies to allow that to happen. So that's a little bit about that exercise.
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating to see how many people were taking a step back to the point where they couldn't go take a step back any further. They literally hit the wall and they stopped, even though there were other questions that were being asked.
Yeah.
That was really interesting. Great. We might have time for one more question here from Betsy. Isn't part of your solution to have those of us on boards and serving our communities to invite our grantees and recipients of the services to the table, including as board members? This seems like one way to start. Is that right?
That definitely is a way to start. I think that, you know, far too often decisions, not just about where money is going, but even like what the actual solution should be, right, are designed inside of institutions where we don't have folks around the table from the communities we're trying to serve. I mean, it just makes like good business sense to me, right, to have folks at the table and to share that power. And, you know, I think if we can truly get to a place that we believe that those who have been the most impacted by the issues we care about actually possess exactly the perspective and wisdom needed to fix some of those issues and bring them to the table, then we're all going to like benefit from that wisdom and expertise. So that's a start. I think, you know, diversity is the low-hanging fruit. We got to get to inclusion, we got to get to repair and all the other aspects. But at a minimum, we should absolutely look around the room and ask who's not there that should be there. There's a direct correlation in philanthropy between who's sitting at those tables and where money's going, right? And so if we want to be more equitable about resourcing and mobilizing those resources to communities, we've got to, you know, make room for diversity of perspectives and experience and folks around the table making decisions.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can you talk a little bit about, actually, that was it for the questions from the group. I just have a question. Can you talk about the Decolonizing Wealth project and how it might factor into changing any dynamic?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, the organization launched as a result of my first book, and there was such a big response to the book. I can't even like explain, mind-blowing response. And a lot of funders in particular began to come to me to want more help, more support, like come to speak to our board, help give us the workshop. How do we actually do this, like step by step, right? And so I developed a workshop that I've done for thousands of funders at this point to really help take them through a process with the 7 steps to think about changes they can make to be more equitable. I have done a lot of advising through the work, and that ultimately led to the launch of our fund, Liberated Capital. Because of the work we were doing, donors were coming to us saying, you know, just take the money and give it out for us, or you know, we want to support XYZ community or issue. We don't have the relationships. Can you all help with that? So we do donor education, advising. We have the fund that actually does grant making. We do a lot of work around healing for people who work in this space. Actually, on Friday, we have a healing summer for white people who work in philanthropy, because even, you know, as I said, we all need healing. We do, with the platform we have, we just do a lot of narrative change kind of work where we're trying to lift up issues impacting our communities. So it's been fantastic. One of the things that I'm really excited about in working with different foundations, a big impact of our work this year was that we advised more than $250 million of new resources to go towards the work of racial justice. including work with the Bush Foundation, who made a commitment of $100 million to start 2 trust funds, one for Black folks in their region and one for Native folks in their region, to really model a different type of funding, to like turn over wealth to these communities, to use the resources in a very self-determined way. So what we see happening as a result of our work is that foundations are really asking questions around what is our own history as an institution? How do we make our money? How have we been privileged? And what is our responsibility to bring that history and knowledge of history into how we're making grants in a different way? So we're having significant impacts. You can go to decolonizingwealth.com to see more about our work. We are funding a movement for reparations in this country. We just announced $1.7 million to 23 Black and Native-led organizations who are fighting for reparations at the different levels, at the state level and at the national level.
Wow.
Work.
Wow, that's incredible. So I think we have time to sneak in one more question. And it actually is a nice segue from what we just talked about, from Paul. What gives you hope about the future of shared human prosperity and our collective propensity to heal as a country and world?
You know, I have so much hope in us as people, as human beings. I have personally experienced a healing journey that's been transformative in my own life on many levels, including how I see money and how I move money. And I've seen the response of institutions and individuals when they actually open up their hearts and mind to have the conversations and to submit to some type of healing process. I think as a country in the US, we are on the brink of having some type of truth and reconciliation process. There are lots of people calling for it. The state of California has the very first statewide process that started about 6 months ago for truth and healing that I think could inform and build momentum for a national process. If we've learned anything after 2020, it's that there is a lot of suffering and we need a lot of healing, and that suffering is mutual, but our thriving can also be mutual. So I'm really inspired by how folks are stepping up, and even these organizations gathered here today, having this conversation in itself is an act of healing and a radical act for opening up questions and perspectives and thinking about how we do our work differently. And that is happening with just thousands and thousands of people every month that I get the chance to speak with. So there's a movement of interest and a movement of action to shift things to be more equitable. And I think we're getting beyond the talk of it and the reports and the intellectual ness of it all to actually real practical actions that I'm seeing happen in the US and also in philanthropy globally. So that inspires me. I get emails every day from just beautiful stories that give me the strength and motivation to keep doing this work.
Wow, thank you. So with our final few minutes, any closing thoughts, anything that you'd like to share with us, advice for us as advisors out there? You've shared so much. I think we've learned so much in these past 50 minutes or so. But anything just as closing remarks?
Yeah, I just invite everyone to try on the identity of being a healer. We all need healing, but we are also in a position to be healers and to see the roles we sit in as resource mobilizers. We have a lot of power and a lot of privilege to be able to access people with wealth to influence their giving. And so I think with that privilege comes the responsibility to repair some things that have been broken in our industry. So it's an invitation for all of us to keep doing the work. This is hard work, y'all. It's the work of a lifetime. We're not gonna there's not enough webinars to make us get us to be perfect with what we're doing, but we have to keep trying and put aside our own fears and fragility and be willing to be bold in this moment. Donors are being bold, right? Like Mackenzie Scott is being bold. We can go down the list. So we can't let the donors get ahead of us. We're supposed to be the ones out front, kind of leading them. So let's step up to that challenge and and really see the power that we have to really influence transformative change in communities. So just thank you all for listening and for being a part of this movement to see those changes happen. It's really exciting.
Well, thank you. And thank you for being bold and telling your story and inspiring so many people with your words, both in your book as well as the speaking engagements that you have. And I'm sure that many people will continue to go on their own journeys as you suggest and see how we can do this together. So with that, I'll hand it back to Jay.
Hey, well, thank you both. What a great conversation. Rick, thank you for the thoughtful questions. And Edgar, really appreciate the thoughtfulness of your answers. As I sat in the background, I was particularly struck by the inclusive way you invite all of us to participate as healers, regardless of the journey that we've taken or the journey our ancestors, right, have taken. Clearly, some of us have gotten here by swimming with the current, benefiting from the system and the way it's been built up over generations. Others of us have been swimming upstream most of the time, but here we are. We find ourselves together in this moment in time with the ability for each of us to be thoughtful about the role that we'll take and the path that we will make together. So thank you very much for spending some time with us. This hour was just captivating. Again, thank you, Rick. Thank you for all the participants. The questions were fantastic and thoughtful. And I hope this session leaves everybody else feeling about half as energized as I do. It'd be great. So thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.
Everyone.